Hello, everyone. This is Warhawk Beyond 2040, and today I am joined with a very special guest who hasn't been on here for a little while now. You know him as the wrestling guru, the one and only, the Holiday Christopher Mace. Chris, great to have you again. How are you?
Oh, work, and more work. You know how that goes. Life and work, though. Like I said, it's great to be back on here for the subject we're talking about today. Because, like I say, I think this is something that's near and dear to both our hearts. And back, just nostalgia is best when we were kids, and good that we're talking about this subject today.
Oh, yes. So, today we are going to be talking about a very iconic cartoon, animated series, TV show, which needs no introduction whatsoever. X-Men, the animated series, which came out in 1992, 31 years ago. Wow. Seems like a lifetime ago.
Oh yeah, it does.
Yeah. So, Chris, we'll start with you. How did you first hear about the X-Men animated series? So we'll start with you.
Interesting enough, I first heard about it in Corpus Christi, Texas. They actually had comic book series based on the animated series.
Oh, yeah, I remember
First,
this.
I was reading the comic book series first of the X Men, and it said X Men animated series issue one, and they made a complete comic book series of all these episodes. And I think it's kind of ironic they had one special issue out of all of them they made, one special issue from season one that had to do with Cable and during season one's events and had to do with Cable being there. And I thought that was always interesting, little side note in history. So that's how I learned about it at first. Was I actually saw the comic books, read some of the comic books, didn't realize there was actually a TV show, and started watching it.
I remember the tie-in comics very well, but they were not easy to find because I always tried to look for them, but they were very hard to track down. The first time I became aware of the X-Men animated series, I hadn't started collecting comic books just yet. I wouldn't start collecting comics till around about 1998. So I got into the cartoons first, and we just got Sky Satellite, and we just got Fox Kids. Fox Kids had just come out on satellite TV, and Fox Kids was kind of like an alternative channel to Cartoon Network, whereas Cartoon Network was more for like more kid friendlier cartoons. Fox Kids would be more like adventure, action driven kind of a channel where they would show Power Rangers, Big Bad Beetleborgs, and things like that, to name a few. And X-Men was one of the first shows that I saw just before Batman, the animated series. And I remember X-Men being very different to any other cartoon that I had seen. And I still remember that iconic theme. That was the one that grabbed me, was that epic intro. I still remember that very, very well. Even as I'm talking about it now, still get chills. And that was kind of how I got into X-Men, was through the Fox Kids channel. And the cool thing about the X-Men was, and I'm sure you agree with this, is that they were a group of superheroes, but they weren't necessarily loved and respected by the public. They feared them. Some people hated them. And I always found that interesting, that you have a group of heroes trying to protect everyone, but not everyone wants them to do that. So it made for a very interesting show. Dark storytelling, colorful costumes. It was a brilliant show. And I remember everyone in school was just mad on the X-Men, and it was a great time. And also, I feel that with X-Men the animated series, it was one of those shows that everyone could watch it. It wasn't just like for adults. Anyone at any age could watch it, and it was a very different kind of show where they concentrated more on long form story arcs. I mean, which characters to you, Holiday, in the X-Men stood out to you? Which was the ones you think made a huge impact on you?
Oh, Gambit. When I was younger, I wanted to see Gambit. Gambit was like the cool one of the whole X Men. He was like the
Absolutely.
one with the cards, and you could just blow up stuff using his kinetic energy and throwing a card at you and blowing stuff up. And I thought that was interesting. That character, when I was a kid growing up, kind of sad what they did with him later on in the comic book series, but In the animated series, they made him pretty much he was kind of like the tweener. He was a good guy, but he had a really dark past. Same thing like Wolverine. Wolverine, same way. Um, Rogue always had an interesting backstory. They kept Rogue's story to me more true to the comic book when I learned about it later on in years later on. Um, yeah, that I would say Gambit was like my favorite one. Now, guest appearances always was fond of Archangel. I thought the story
Oh,
arc with Angel becoming Archangel was
oh,
always interesting, and I think right behind that was finally having an episode when Iceman made an appearance. Finally, I thought that was interesting as well.
the X-Men that stood out to me was always Cyclops. I always looked at Cyclops. He was like the Superman of the team. He was like the ultimate good guy, but at the same time, he was a guy that you didn't want to mess with. And he would always go above and beyond of the call of duty to protect his teammates and his friends. And he was always the guy you could learn something from him. And he really stood out to me the most. He had a very good costume, always stayed pretty much the same from when I was getting into the X-Men comics after the cartoon. Yellow and blue, dark brown hair, sometimes dark red hair. And the interesting thing about Cyclops was in his civilian guise, he always wore the dark glasses. And at the
Yeah,
time growing up, I always thought that why does he wear the dark glasses? But then I remember an episode later on when I think was it Mr. Sinister took his glasses off and he had his eyes shut, and the glasses was to contain his energy beams because if he opened his eyes, he would start melting stuff. And I always thought that was interesting about Cyclops. He was a guy that he was always worried about not being able to control his powers properly, just like Superman. So I liked that, and I always enjoyed him butting heads with Wolverine, which reminded me of Superman and Batman. You know, always rubbing each other up the wrong way. But there was always that respect thing there as well, and him and Jean Grey, the dynamic there, it just made Cyclops a very interesting character to me. And my favorite guest character was always Colossus. I always, and still do to this day, I've always had a thing for Colossus. Big guy, powerhouse, incredibly strong, could turn into metal. Yeah, he was always probably of the guest characters. He was always my favorite, and I always loved seeing Colossus, even though he didn't have as many appearances in the show. But when he did appear, I always used to get excited. So, yay, Colossus is here. I loved Colossus. They were my two favorite X-Men characters growing up. The character that I found very annoying was probably Jubilee. I mean, what was your thoughts on Jubilee?
I think she grew after a while. Like you said, I mean, with the story arc, she grew after a while. Like you said, you got I when I was a kid, it was like, God, she's just annoying in first season, but then she started growing into her own. I think I think when you had to see like the episode, like the season finale of season one, where she like, all right, what are we doing? We need to go. And he goes, Wolverine says, sit down, kid, you're not going. Because I'm not a kid anymore. I'm one of you, one of the X-Men. It means more to me than anything in the world. And I think that's when you see where she starts growing a little bit. Yeah, in each season she makes some kind of mistake, but also I think too she's like the youngest member of the X-Men at that time, so she's still in this learning curve. And I think towards the end of the series is when she starts growing and more maturing more.
Yeah, I mean, Jubilee, I think the character was about 17 years old. I mean, I've heard and seen different versions of Jubilee. I remember in the comic books, I think she was Korean. I think she
Yeah.
was Korean in the comics. I remember her costume has never changed. She always wore like this long yellow leather trench coat, jean shorts, pink and yellow top, and these pink boots as well. And she always wore like the purple, pinky purple shades like Bret the Hitman Hart would wear. And she had like very short black hair. Yeah, I found Jubilee very annoying at first. I thought, why is she with the X-Men? You know, you got all these cool guys like Cyclops, Gambit, and Wolverine. Why have we got this girl here? But then, as you say, over the course of time, she does start to grow on you, and you realise that she's not just a kid; she is a serious character in her own right. And I seem to recall her powers were fireworks. Was that were her powers?
Yeah, something like that. She shot
Pyro.
fireworks out of her fingers and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, I remember. I remember her powers were kind of like fireworks, pyrotechnics sort of thing. Another character that really stood out to me was Storm. I really like Storm a lot. Very powerful. My only issue with her when I was younger, I was like, oh, it's so annoying. But then when I rewatched it again, I kind of laugh a bit more. She used to used to say, "Bring forth the power of thunder." I always remember that about Storm, that she was quite over the top with her powers, but she was quite cool. I mean, what do you remember about Storm? What stood out to you with her?
Legendary leader of the X-Men. So it's funny now when you look back. It's like you think about because you've seen the character played in movies and stuff like that now a few times, and
Yeah,
she doesn't do any of that. But in animated series, when you're a kid, you're going, "Oh, that's pretty cool." When you're an adult, you're going, "She is very animated." Why call upon the Arctic winds to freeze
yeah.
this water? Like, are you having to tell it what to do exactly? No, I need you to specifically do what I said now. Okay, come on now. I'm telling you what to do. I think that's where I think she was. I think they made it so people like kids could understand. Like, okay, this is what she's doing exactly, word for word, and that's when I think that's why they did it that way, which is fine now. I look at it's fine now because kids will, oh, that's cool, and adults are like going, oh, that's kind of common sense now when you look at it. But okay, but it is what it is now. Like I said, I can understand why they did it.
Not much has really changed with Storm's look over the years. I mean, she still maintains the long white hair, the white eyes. Her costume has gone through a couple of interesting changes. I remember in the comic books, I think it was in 78 or 83, um, she had like black pants and black boots, and she had like this yellow and black see-through cape, and she used to wear like this headpiece. That was her first costume I remember. I think that might have been in 78. And then fast forward to the 90s, she wore this all white leather costume with the cape that would be attached to her wrists on both sides. So when she would fly up, her cape and everything would go with her. That's what I remembered. And then I remember another version, she had like this white mohawk hairstyle where she had both sides of her hair all shaved off, and she had like these big lightning earrings. Yeah, she's gone through a number of interesting changes. And I mean, to have a character who can essentially control the weather, I mean, that's a pretty cool team member to have. Someone who can control all the weather. I thought that was quite an interesting power. What was your thoughts on the Beast?
Beast is an interesting character, very poetic, very intelligent. He was one of those ones that he was not what the original what I've heard now after all these years later, he was not supposed to be end up being a main character. He was supposed to end up being put in jail in the beginning and then not really being able to come back anytime soon, and he only made cameo appearances.
That's
And
right.
so that way, and that's where you go, okay, well that's interesting. But then the people liked him so much they want him to stay.
Yeah, I mean, Beast, he's been in the X-Men since day one with Cyclops. He's one of the original members of the team. And I think, looking at the lineup of the X-Men team, I mean, apart from Cyclops and Beast, who pretty much started the team, most of the team members were all different. They didn't really start out from the beginning. So, Beast was good. I'm glad they kept Beast in there because you at least got two original guys who've been there from the beginning. And I like with Beast that he was like, if you got Cyclops, who's the field leader, you've got Beast. He's kind of like the voice of reason. He's very intelligent, very peaceful, very calm. And he wasn't always about fighting. He was always trying to find other ways to resolve issues, which made him a perfect foil for Professor Xavier, because Professor Xavier has always been about resolving things in a non-violence manner. So having Beast be that guy was great. And I like that we got to know Beast more, because I remember there was an episode where we learned how he became like that, because he didn't start out like that originally, as we know.
No, he didn't.
Yeah. So
And
that
the
was
interesting thing with that is too, they reference that a lot more in the 2 episodes the X Men appeared in Spider-Man, the animated series, more than they really did the X-Men series. That's when they reference it a whole lot more with Beast.
yeah, that's
I
right. There's,
I know they had one episode about a love story he was in. I can't remember what episode it would have been. I don't remember off the top of my head what season that would have been. I think it might have been season 3, but that's when they had the love episode with him and a woman he met. I can't remember the woman's name now.
I know. I think I kind of remember it. It's been a long time, but I kind of remember Beast meeting a lady and
Yeah,
falling in love with her. But I think was he hiding in a hat and coat? He wouldn't reveal his
yeah, he
form.
was.
Yeah, I think I remember that. That was I don't think that was season one. I think that might have been season three, perhaps.
I know it's really hard. I'm looking through the list right at the moment. I'm going and I'm
Been a long
trying to.
time. I
Nope,
sort of remember.
it was season 2. It's Beauty and the Beast. It's Wolverine infiltrates the Friends of Humanity headquarters. Oh, that's because the Friends of Humanity are after Beast because he falls in love with this woman. That's why.
I was. I kind of guessed it was an early episode. I didn't know it was season two. I thought it was like season three.
I no, that's why, folks. If you're hearing us and we're referencing certain things, we're gonna have the playlist logged up here, so that way if we reference something, I can go back and double check stuff because we like to try to be as accurate as possible on these shows.
Yeah, we're doing our best because it's been a long time since we've gone back to this. So just keep up with us. We're trying. Wolverine always stood out to me. I mean, as much as I loved Cyclops, he's my guy. Wolverine to me, and I think everyone would agree with this. Wolverine definitely stood out from the X-Men. Loved his costume, very iconic, blue, yellow, black. To me, he was the Batman of the show. Maybe not in terms of being smart and having all of the gadgets and being wealthy, but he was just very stubborn, didn't like listening to anyone, always did things his own way. He really stood out to me. And some of the best episodes of the show were definitely with Wolverine. What was your thoughts on Wolverine in the show? What was your opinion?
Um, he was the badass. He was the one that you didn't want to mess with, especially after the first 2 episodes of X Men, where he's angry at Cyclops because he left Morphin Beast there behind, and he
That's right.
punches Cyclops in the gut and says, "Next time it's going to be with knees." And Cyclops get ready to shoot him. He's like, "I've had enough of you," and they still always constantly fighting. And Wolverine, out of anger, slices up Cyclops Jeep and everything like that and tears it all up and
Yeah,
everything. Goes, "Oh, I made him convertible." And right then you're establishing that this man, he ain't gonna play. If he disagrees with you, he's gonna tell you point blank he disagrees with you. And they had several episodes where they reference his Weapon X thing, his feud with Sabretooth,
oh yeah.
um, just the different things he went through. Hey, the my favorite one was towards the very end of the series, season 5, where he had to show his past. He was visiting a graveside of a friend of his and the doctor actually, and he went back in time where he had to go save him, and he teamed up with Captain America, and that was one of the first times Captain America made an appearance in the X-Men show. Because you saw different appearances, but they were always cameos. This is one of those few times where it was actually a different character, not really part of the X Men, actually had a full episode with him, and referencing stuff from the past. And I thought that was interesting because he was revisiting his past without his metal claws. And Captain America at one point said, "Wouldn't that be great if they were metal?" He said, "Yeah, wouldn't they?" And it was
I think
referencing
I remember
like
that. It's been a long
foreshadowing
time. I
that was
remember
going to happen.
one of the things that stood out to me in X-Men. One of the first things I think of is the whole dynamic between Cyclops, Wolverine, and Jean Grey. Now, Jean Grey, I thought was a very interesting character, especially who she becomes later on down the line. Jean Grey, and again, another original member. She's been in the X-Men since day one. She was Marvel Girl, Cyclops' girlfriend. Wolverine fancies her. Love that stuff. I really like Jean Grey a lot. Out of all of the female characters in the X-Men, I love Storm. Don't get me wrong. I love Storm, but I always like Jean Grey just a little bit more. The long flowing red hair, that weird looking, I don't know, like skimpy body attire she used to wear. And then, of course, when she becomes the Phoenix slash Dark Phoenix, she really stood out to me a lot. What was your thoughts on Jean Grey?
Jean Grey could be hit or miss sometimes at the beginning because Jean Grey would be there at some missions she wouldn't. So to me, she didn't become more interesting until you had the love triangle and stuff like that, and you could tell clear as day it was always a love triangle between Wolverine, her, and Cyclops, and that was always been there even through the comics.
Oh,
And
it's never
I
changed.
think, like I said, once you got to the Phoenix Saga and the Dark Phoenix Saga, because like you said, season 3 was one of the second longest season you had was season 3 at 19 episodes because it was five. I think it was 5 parts to the Phoenix Saga. Make sure I'm just one of references right. Yeah, 5 parts to the Phoenix Saga, and it was 5 parts to the Dark Phoenix Saga.
That's right.
And it was like one of those things where it's like, yeah, 5 and 5. So yeah, 19 episodes, and 10 of them was referencing her story arc and everything like that. So I thought that made her more interesting of a character. And then when she returns the first time, then when she returns again, because it's not like she was gone for a few episodes and then she came back as Dark Phoenix, and she was gone again and she came back again. So if she wasn't one of those ones that recurred all the time, I think the most consistent character on almost every episode was either Professor X or it was like Cyclops. They were always, because there's always been episodes where there weren't appearances by certain characters. Like one episode I remember season 1, it was just basically about Jubilee, Storm, and Gambit all going to a vacation, and then the Sentinels that capture them. They go on Slave
Yeah,
Island. That was one. That's when you get to introduce yourself to Cable in the season 1. That's when Cable gets introduced, which people don't realize because they never really referenced it until the end of the season that Cable is Cyclops and Jean Grey's son in the future.
that's right. And another episode I remembered. Now we'll be slowly getting into the villains shortly. Another episode I remembered in reference to the vacation thing you mentioned was I remember Cyclops and Jean Grey going on holiday just to have a break from X-Men stuff, and they were kidnapped by the Nasty Boys,
Yep.
and they were basically taken to Mr. Sinister. I love that. That was a really good episode where Mr. Sinister. I think I don't know if that was the first appearance of Mr. Sinister or not, but it might have been one of the first ones. And
It
I
was.
always it was it was I thought so. I always remembered anytime Mr. Sinister showed up, Cyclops used to get really, really pissed seeing him. Almost like when Superman sees Darkseid, he gets extra grouchy and really angry. He's like, "What are you doing here? Go away." So I like that with Cyclops and Mr. Sinister. That was always a lot of fun to see. And Mr. Sinister to me was like Dracula. He was like Dracula in black and red metallic. He was just a really good villain, and he had that weird robotic smooth metallic voice. I really loved Mr. Sinister. He was definitely my favorite X-Men villain, even still to this day. You know, whenever someone asks me if you could have one villain to appear in an X-Men movie, who would it be? I said that is easy, Mr. Sinister. I'm still waiting for that, but yeah, he was a really good villain. Charles Xavier, I thought was written very well in the show, and to me, you couldn't have X-Men without Charles Xavier. You couldn't have it without Professor Xavier. He he was the glue that kept the X-Men together. No matter how bad someone was, he was always willing to give them a chance and say things like, "You're not an enemy here. You're among friends and family. We're here to help you learn to control and accept your powers better." And I love that of Professor Xavier. You kind of need that, you know, when you got characters like Wolverine, Cyclops, Gambit just running around doing as they like. You need that father figure to keep the guys and the girls in check. And Xavier was absolutely perfect in that role. And that hover chair, still a yellow hover chair. I always remember that about Xavier, just floating around in the house and he's the hover chair and speaking to people with his mind. I thought he was a really cool character. What was your thoughts on Professor Xavier?
Like I said, he was the leader of the X-Men. He could read everybody's mind, but he didn't use the power to abuse it. He used it when it was a necessity. I do. Now he's had his moments where he snapped, like season 2. He was attacked by the Dark Phoenix, and he had an evil personality. The evil side of him came out, and they were attacking the X-Men.
I remember
You have
him.
one in particular I just watched recently. It was season 4, episode 1, when the Juggernaut returns after. This is supposed to be like after the events of Gladiator, throwing Juggernaut around like pretty much like a rag doll, just threw him around. And he came back, and another guy found the tablet and the ruby to take Juggernaut's powers. And Juggernaut was trying to hurt Xavier, and there was only Xavier and Beast there, and he was dying. So he was reading Kane's mind and finding out that Kane never cared about him at all. It was only huge people like Kane blames him for his father not loving him, that he was only with Xavier's mother because of money when she got sick, and this when Xavier started first finding out about his powers. Kane made sure everybody hated him because he was a mutant, and he called him Muty, made sure everybody hated him, made sure the girl he loved didn't like him anymore. And you saw scenes where Xavier got emotional. He's like, I talking to Storm outside, looking at Upon, goes, I'm not. Don't ask me to forgive him. Don't never ask me to forgive him. He's a monster. Never ask me to forgive him. He goes, I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm just telling you that you taught us we had to look for the good and do all this other stuff. He goes, you're not listening to your own advice. What you're telling us to do, and that's when they end up saving Juggernaut, restoring his powers, and then they all think they're about to brawl, and Juggernaut's like, another time perhaps. And he goes, wait a minute, Juggernaut's walking away from a fight, and Xavier goes, that's probably his way of saying thank you for saving his life, because without the power, he had the power so long, without the power, he was dying. And that one was an interesting episode because that showed the side of Xavier. And best one was, I think, was Iceman, when his constant arguments with Iceman appeared, arguing with Bobby,
Yeah,
arguing with
remember
Iceman
that.
over. That was like a father-son relationship. He was just arguing with him, Cyclops and him arguing all the time, and Wolverine didn't understand what was this bitterness towards everybody, because Beast is the only one really talking to Iceman. Jubilee was curious about him, but Wolverine didn't understand why there was so much animosity and bickering between everybody with them.
Yeah, I mean, after I got into the X-Men comics, I was still watching the X-Men cartoons. It always intrigued me, like what actually happened to the original X-Men team, because in the original comics they were called the Uncanny X-Men back in the 60s. And
Yeah.
obviously throughout the comic books they started changing characters. Some characters they would drop and they were bringing new ones. But the one that always bugged me a lot, because the original X-Men team's my all-time favorite incarnation, with the four of them slash five, was what happened to them? Like, why did they break up? Why isn't Iceman around? So when it got to that episode you're talking about, where you get a flashback montage of the original X-Men in the iconic yellow and blue suits, which I loved seeing, which really appealed to me. It was very weird because, yeah, Wolverine was always stubborn with Xavier, but he never really got into arguments with him. He always respected him and said, okay, I'm still going to do things my own way, but I'll listen to what you have to say. But whereas with Iceman, he was very defiant. He said, no, I quit. I thought that was really interesting. That was a very good episode.
Well, he quit because of Polaris. They had a disagreement about when she almost died on a mission, and that's why he quit. And him and Polaris left, and then Polaris ended up later on with Havoc, who we don't get revealed till a long time later. That is Scott Summers' brother, Cyclops' brother. We don't get that revealed till later on in the series.
That's right.
And that was an interesting one as well, because then Bobby's upset because Polaris fell in love with somebody else, but he thought she was kidnapped, and she wasn't kidnapped. She just left because she wanted to use her powers for the good of humanity, and he did not. He wanted to just live a normal life and be a normal person.
Yeah, I remember that. It's a shame, really, because I would have liked to have seen more of Iceman, because, Iceman's one of the founding members of the X-Men and one of the originals. Just would have been nice to have seen more of him, because I like Iceman. I mean, I'm very glad they didn't go with the original design of Iceman, because the original Iceman, he was just like a pile of snow in a pair of black boots. So I'm really glad they didn't go with that design, because that would have looked really silly in the
Now,
animated series.
they had done that in the montage, that would have been that would have been amazing because that was how
Yeah.
he was originally.
So onto the big part of the X-Men, the villains. We'll start with the biggest one of all, Magneto. Very interesting character. Really stood out to me. Magneto was an interesting character. He was a villain, but he wasn't like Apocalypse or Mr. Sinister. He wasn't like all about being evil and wanting to be in control. His beliefs were very similar to Xavier's, but Xavier's beliefs were more about mutants and humans should live together in peace and harmony. Magneto's was, on the other hand, no, we've got the power. They should be bowing down to us. We're practically gods. This was something that was explored very heavily in the movies, especially in the later stuff when in the First Class era. Loved Magneto, very good character. My only problem with Magneto in later years was I felt that he was becoming too overexposed, that we were seeing too much of him. But at the same time, he's one of those guys that you can't really have the X-Men without him. You have to have him there, even if he is overexposed at times. I mean, what was your thoughts on Magneto?
I don't think Magneto was overexposed more until later on in the
Yeah,
series
next
because
he was.
it was like it's like season one. You only saw him like a handful of times. You didn't know a handful of times. You saw him in 2 episodes and then the season finale. And then like season two, you saw him a little bit more because Savage Island was what his creation was originally for Asteroid M. And Savage Land was his creation. This is a way for him to, have peace and everything like that and get away from people and humanity.
Yeah.
And then you saw more of him in season three. Actually, season three, you didn't see much of him because season three was more about the Phoenix Saga, the Dark Phoenix Saga. He didn't really play a role in that too much. And then
No,
you definitely get him more in season four because of them dealing with Asteroid M in season four, and then them dealing with the ultimate confrontation with all the villains when they come up there beyond good and evil, all four parts. That's when you see them a lot more because all the villains are trying to they come up with a master plan to take over the past, present, future, kill everybody off by Apocalypse taking over everything, by taking Cable's device to time travel and do all this stuff and pretty much rewrite history with all the villains being able to win.
yeah,
So, I mean, do I think he was overexposed? No, I don't think he was actually used enough in some instances because, like I said, season three, he wasn't really even a part of season three because of the Phoenix and Dark Phoenix saga. He wasn't even involved in any of that.
no, I know he wasn't overexposed in the animated series. I think later on in the movies, he
In the movie, yeah, he
definitely,
definitely was. He was. They
definitely
never just. Yeah, they used him so much, and now he's supposed to be. Ian McKellen's supposed to be reprising his role in Deadpool 3. So he said he'll be returning again to Magneto.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've been reading, virtually everyone from the X-Men movies are all supposed to be coming back in some shape or form. I mean, James Marsden, I heard, is coming back as Cyclops. Famke Janssen's coming back as Jean Grey. Halle Berry, I think, has actually confirmed that she will be coming back to play Storm. And
Yeah.
Patrick Stewart, although he's kept quiet, he hasn't said, no, I won't be coming back. He just said, you never know. You could see an appearance from Charles Xavier. I didn't hear about Ian McKellen coming back as Magneto, but then it wouldn't surprise me if he did come back. So yeah, you're going to pretty much see most of these guys return. What was your thoughts on Mr. Sinister?
Epic villain. I love the fact that they made it where Cyclops is the only one that could hurt him, which is made it very interesting because I like how you got the tease after the season finale of episode one, where you got the tease of, and when Jean and Cyclops and somebody's watching them on the video and she goes, "You never know what's going to happen." He goes, "Sinister knows what the future holds," and that's when they go get married, and that's when the big reveal that Morph is still alive because Sinister brought him back to life, and
Is there any corrupted?
you know that was interesting because in the comics, Morph never came back to life. And I think that was a lot of things people, the diehard fans in the 90s were talking about. Morph never came back to life in the comic books. What are they doing? But they used it and turned it into a good story with Morph. And they had to have somebody else besides Sinister that was an antagonist, and so Morph being the antagonist for most of the episode, most of the season was interesting, especially because it bothered Wolverine a lot. Sinister used Morph to toy with Wolverine's emotion, because Wolverine's regret was they did not go back in season one, go back and save Beast and Morph, because he feels like if they would have stayed, he could have saved Morph, but they didn't. So he was angry still about that, his failure of saving his friend. And Sinister using Cyclops being the one to hurt him, and then the ultimate fight with him in the Savage Lands where they lose their powers. And it was always funny, they lose their powers, but Wolverine's like, my claws are not mutant. And he gets his claws out, but they hurt when he pulls them out, they hurt now. So, I thought, like I said, Sinister as a villain overall, especially towards that season 4 finale, he was one of the main villains involved in that the season 4 4-part finale. I thought Sinister as the villain, I think, was one of the better villains. Magneto will always be the X-Men's main villain, but Sinister was right up there in that level with Magneto, because the difference is Magneto, like in the end of season 1, Magneto ends up going to help the X-Men stop Sentinels when he didn't have to, where Sinister wouldn't give a crap. He's like, oh, the Sentinels kill you, I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, I loved Sinister, as I said earlier. I'm a big fan of Mr. Sinister, always have been. Again, big guy in a black, red, metallic suit. Looks like something out of a horror movie, like Dracula, if Dracula lived in the future. Really good villain. And yeah, anytime Mr. Sinister showed up in an episode, it was always a good day for me because I knew it was going to be epic. And I loved all of the Sinister episodes. They were fantastic. Got to see Cyclops in a much bigger role, taking on the bad guy himself. And like you said, being the only X-Men who could actually hurt him and used to like melt him with his energy beams. And I remember in that Savage Island arc, he blew Mr. Sinister into like 1,000 pieces.
Yeah.
And you see like his minion goes, "Oh, Master, I'm so sorry." And he's like picking pieces of him up, and putting it in a bag, and that was really good. And I'll never forget that line. And this is what cemented Cyclops as my favorite. He just quietly says, "Stay away from my friends." I was like, yeah, I love that. Yeah, Mr. Sinister, definitely up there with Magneto, as you say, one of the best X-Men villains. And as I said, I'm still waiting for that day we get Mr. Sinister in an X-Men movie on the big screen in live action. I am waiting for that day. I don't care if I have to wait till I'm 100. I want Mr. Sinister in an X-Men film because he is long, long overdue to appear. It was a brilliant villain. And of course, how can we forget big villains without mentioning perhaps the biggest and the baddest of them all, Apocalypse? You can't have a conversation without Apocalypse. What was your thoughts on him?
This is the Apocalypse we should have gotten in the X-Men Apocalypse movie, and what we got was a hand-me-down version of Ivan Ooze from Power Rangers.
Oh,
the thing, the thing is, this is the Apocalypse we all were waiting for when the movie came out, and this is the version of Apocalypse that he was sadistic, he didn't care, he knew what he was doing. You see him in season 1, he makes his 4 horsemen, he has Mystique helping him. Mystique has her gang with Pyro and Avalanche and the Blob. Apocalypse is the main villain throughout the series too. Season 2, I thought, was where he really shined because you had Bishop go back in time, and that's the thing. Bishop goes back in time, and the first time is try to stop the Days of Future Past. The second time was more interesting because it had to deal with Cable and Bishop. Bishop going back in time. Cable's trying to tell him you can't do this because whatever happened, you're destroying my future by trying to save your time. But what happened? And this is about the virus that was coming out that was killing mutants. Apocalypse genetically engineered to kill the mutants off. Because people forget, Apocalypse was the creator of all mutants. Apocalypse was the first ever mutant.
That's right.
And they don't ever really reference that in the show, but in comics, he was the very first mutant. And he's making sure he's trying to kill them off. But this was interesting with dealing with Bishop and his time traveling, plus Cable and his time traveling, that Cable saying, no, you can't do it this way because he's in the first, it was the Time Fugitive episode, part 1 and 2. Bishop's going back that they're battling Apocalypse. He destroys the virus, but actually Apocalypse ends up killing all the X-Men and Bishop. So Cable said, the only way I can save my future is I have to help my greatest foe, a villain, Apocalypse, to save my future. And so he goes back, he fixes it, he shoots the virus, it goes into Wolverine. Bishop's like, what are you doing? He said, watch. His healing factor is healing him. They're coming up with a cure for this virus, so the virus will be no good. And then they escape and they avoid Apocalypse killing them this time. Because Apocalypse escapes this time instead of getting mad, getting large and killing them like he did the first episode. So I thought, yes, Apocalypse as the villain, especially towards season 4 when you get into what he's doing with the time traveling, stealing Cable's time traveling device, and changing everything so the villains win in that series, Beyond Good and Evil. If you've never watched that, I would definitely recommend that story arc. It's towards the end of season 4, the last 4 episodes, because this was how the show was supposed to end until they renewed it for season 5. And when they renewed it season 5, I will tell you what, the animation completely changed, and the animation was nowhere near what it should have been at when they did season 5.
Apocalypse to me was the dark side of the show. You know, just like Darkseid is the heavy hitter of the DC universe, Apocalypse was definitely the heavy hitter for the X-Men. And, you know, big guy, tubes on his back, you know, could make himself any size he wanted, acquired all different powers of various different mutants, and as you say, the first ever mutant in history. Very strong, very powerful, gave the X-Men a lot of trouble. And I remember watching those Apocalypse episodes. I always said to myself, can you imagine what you could do with someone like that in the movie on a larger scale? I waited for years and years. I said, I cannot wait for Apocalypse to appear. So if we, and I always, me and my friend always said that if they ever did, if they ever decided that we're going to do the last X-Men movie, this is going to be it, we're not going to be making any more, we always said Apocalypse should have been the final quote unquote boss, so to speak. Unfortunately, we didn't get that in the movie. No respect to Oscar Isaac. He's an incredible actor. Seems to get plagued with bad writing. He didn't look the part of Apocalypse. He was too short. He looked like a watered down Ivan Ooze. The guy I would have picked to play Apocalypse, unfortunately, he passed away a number of years ago. Michael Clark Duncan. He would have been phenomenal as Apocalypse. He's the right height, weight. He's got that deep voice anyway. And I remember seeing a fan-made picture of him just before the X-Men Apocalypse movie came out. I thought, holy cow, if this guy had lived and he was cast, what a movie that would have been or could have been with him. He would have been phenomenal as Apocalypse, because he was like that in real life. So you know, seeing Apocalypse in live action, his look, it just disappointed me. And as a fan, you know, of those Apocalypse stories, especially the Age of Apocalypse story arc from '83, very, very disappointing. I just thought, how could you mess that up? Yeah, how could you just mess that up? But in the cartoon, definitely in the top 3 best villains with Sinister and Magneto. He was definitely up there for sure. And another guy, you touched upon him earlier, we have to mention him here, Archangel. Archangel was fantastic. Metallic wings, blue and purple suit, blue skin. He was a phenomenal character. What was your thoughts on Archangel?
Oh, I liked Archangel. I like the fact that, you know, he became Archangel because he was trying to find a cure for his wings and stuff like that. He wanted to be normal. He was very rich. He was very powerful. So he was Warren Warrington III, and he thought this was cure. He became Archangel. Rogue ended up absorbing some of his powers, and that way it shrugged the brainwashing of Apocalypse off of him, and therefore he was still in that Archangel form, but he had his human side back. So he fled. We saw him later on Rogue understood more about what he was doing. He was trying to find like the tablet and stuff like that, trying to be able to stop Apocalypse, and that doesn't end up panning out very well for him because that's not how it worked with him. And like I said, you see him sporadic appearances here or there, and it's one of those things. So I mean, it's like I said, his best episode besides season one episodes was definitely I would say season three, episode nine, Obsession. Is that his best one because he's obsessed with trying to figure out how to destroy Apocalypse, and Rogue is saying, I understand, because Rogue remembers his anger and frustration with Apocalypse and everything like that. And like I said, you really don't see him too much in the animated series, not as much as I would like to. So he's one of those guest characters I like. And another one too was Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler, you got to see him more towards later on in the seasons, but you see him once or twice here, and then he had a nice little story arc where the reveal of who his mother was and stuff like that I thought was really interesting, which is Mystique. If anybody doesn't know, read comic books, sorry if that's a spoiler, but they had that big reveal, and I thought that was interesting as well.
Yeah, Archangel growing up, definitely one of my favorites. I loved the idea of, a character with metallic wings. I think that's probably due to the fact I was a big fan of Hawkman growing up. So the idea of Marvel having that sort of character with these metallic wings and wearing like the purpley blue suit and blue skin, he really stood out to me a lot. Angel, obviously, we know that Archangel originally was a founding member of the X-Men. So seeing him essentially turn to the dark side, going with Apocalypse, was really good and a very interesting twist because normally when you have X-Men members leaving, you never really see them go rogue. You just go and they stay on their own. But to see one of their own go with the biggest evil of all time in Apocalypse, I thought that was a very good twist. And he was a guy I still want to see a proper take on him in the X-Men movies. I remember when X-Men 3 was getting ready to come out, they advertised the hell out of Angel. They said Angel's going to be the secret weapon. He's going to have a big part in the X-Men movies. I thought, yeah, I can't wait to see Angel. He was barely in the movie. He was barely in the movie. I think the only thing he got to do was he saved his dad falling off the Brooklyn Bridge. That was it.
Yeah, same. Yep.
I just thought one of the most important X-Men characters in history, especially what he becomes later on. And that's how you handle him. I thought I was so upset. And then they brought him back for the Apocalypse movie. It was slightly better. I thought the metallic wings looked amazing in live action, but again, they didn't do much with him. And,
right.
We know the history of this guy. You just sit there and think, do these people who make these movies actually have read the source material? Do you have any idea who this guy is? He's a founding member of the X-Men. He's one of Apocalypse's main horsemen, second in command. And this is how he gets treated. But yeah, they didn't do any justice to him in the movies. But in the cartoon, even though it was only a small handful of appearances, as you say, he was fantastic, very well written. And anytime he appeared, it was always a big deal. Nightcrawler, I've always loved Nightcrawler. He's always been one of my favorites. He's quite funny, a bit eccentric. The idea of him teleporting at will, very cool. And the connection with him and Mystique. Yeah, that wasn't really touched on in the movies. I always hoped they would, but they never did. So a bit of a bummer on that one. But how he was showcased in the animated series, yeah, he was done very well, but they didn't really show a lot of him. As you say, it was more towards the end that they showed more of him. What was your thoughts on? We're going to get into the story arcs now. We have to talk about this one, the Dark Phoenix saga. What do you remember about it growing up?
Well, you gotta go with the Phoenix Saga first to understand. Dark Phoenix Saga didn't happen until after you did the Phoenix Saga, which is interesting because, like I said, season three, you start off with the Lady Deathlock and the Wolverine story first, and then it goes into the Phoenix Saga and everything like that. And like I said, it's 5 episodes, but you get an introduction to a lot of people. You get an introduction to Gladiator, Alondra, you see Banshee, you see the Starjammers, you see all kinds of different characters introduced, which is funny because then later on you realize the leader of the Starjammers is actually the father of Cyclops and Havoc. And that's an interesting story arc too. That's a lot of stuff happened because of the Phoenix Saga and the Dark Phoenix Saga that happened that carried more episodes later. And like I said, Jean has to sacrifice herself to, stop everything from happening. And then we have a few episodes where it goes away for a little bit, and then she returns in the Dark Phoenix. And she returns, just out of the sudden, out of the blue, she returns. Everybody thinks it's good to go. And then this is where you get the Hellfire Club introduction with Shaw and the White Queen and all these other characters. And that's where you get that introduction to the Hellfire Club. And
Was
they're trying to.
Black Tom was Black Tom in trying to, because the reason you just mentioned Hellfire Club, Black Tom was part of that as well, wasn't he?
Was.
Yeah, I remember him. Yeah, I remember him.
And Mastermind is trying to, like, Mastermind is using his abilities. He's trying to force the Phoenix into killing everybody, killing Cyclops, killing everybody. And like I said, and this is interesting too, because like you've seen it in the movies. So they took reference from the anime series and used it in the movies, where Jean goes back to visit her childhood home, trying overwhelmed with all the power she has.
Yeah.
And then it becomes interesting because, and I was incorrect, folks, when I said this. So the Phoenix Saga was 5 parts. I think they have, Phoenix Saga was 5 parts. The Dark Phoenix Saga was only 4 parts. For some reason, I had it 5 and 5, and I was incorrect. But like I said, Alondra has to try to stop the Dark Phoenix and everything like that, and it takes all of them to finally stop her. But then she gets stopped and she's gone again for a little while. So, I mean, the importance of them, they did the Dark Phoenix Saga better in the animated series than they ever did in both the movies. And the Last Stand and the Dark Phoenix movie they did recently.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't a fan of those two movies. I think the Dark Phoenix movie was slightly better. They got some of it right, but at the same time, not completely. But it was slightly better than Last Stand. I remember the Phoenix Saga. I seem to remember a point where Jean Grey went back to being Marvel Girl in one part. She she went back to being Marvel Girl. She wore one of her, I think, was the second costume of Marvel Girl, which was like green, like a bright green and yellow attire, which looked kind of like Catwoman. I love both of them. I thought that I remember watching them on Fox Kids. I thought this could have easily been made into an animated movie because the writing, everything about it, the dialogue, the execution. I thought, holy cow, we should have made these into feature-length animated movies for VHS because they were so good. And I still say to this day that the Phoenix Saga, and especially the Dark Phoenix Saga, they were the best story arcs of the show because the Phoenix Saga was more about understanding what the Phoenix was, and the Dark Phoenix Saga, she was essentially a villain. They had to stop her, but at the same time, it was a conflicting story because yes, the Phoenix is a villain, and the Dark Phoenix is the villain, but at the same time, it's still Jean Grey, so you still had that story going on. But yeah, I really loved those story arcs a lot, and they really hold up well. I remember they were so popular. I think they even reissued them as their own DVD sets. I remember them. I remember Dark Phoenix Saga. Obviously, they tricked us all. They said Dark Phoenix Saga animated movie. I thought, sweet. And I looked back and I just thought, that's not a movie. It's just 4 episodes stuck together. But it was cool. It was cool because it shows how popular that saga really is because they always go back to it the most. But yeah, I loved both of them. I think out of the two, I like the Dark Phoenix saga just a bit more. I loved the costume. She had like this dark red metallic costume with the long gold gloves and boots, and she had this massive red hair, like an afro sort of hair. It was just nuts. It was just like Human Torch on steroids. She was just so over the top, but I thought she was a really good character and probably up there for me with Mr. Sinister. But yeah, I love those two story arcs very much. And another story arc, which is up there as well, is Days of Future Past. Can't have
Yep.
an excellent conversation without Days of Future Past. Now, we both know that in the original comic books, it was Kitty Pryde that went in the past. Now, for the animated series, it was Bishop. What do you remember about that story arc, and what did you think of Bishop being the Kitty Pryde role instead of Kitty Pryde?
Well, when I was a kid, I hadn't really started reading it. I was reading the anime X-Men. I hadn't gotten really into it. Like I said, that was a story arc my dad was in the 70s that my dad knew about, and my dad told me about it because
Yeah,
he read books when he was a kid, younger. And so as far as I knew, the very first time when I was a kid, because this season one, so this is when I was 10 years old, and I thought it was Bishop who went back in time for a while, and so I learned later on it was Kitty Pryde. Um, so to me, my first experience was Bishop going back in time, watching the animated series, and like I said, I thought it was really good. Like I said, Bishop going back in time, not remembering what was going on, thinking Gambit was the assassin, but then it would turn out to be Mystique, and it was turned out to be Mystique disguised as Gambit and stuff, and then the conclusion, because you can't say, I know Days of Future Past is 2 episodes, but the final decision was in corresponded with that. This was that was season finale, and
yeah,
that's one of the best episodes, I think, endings of season one's the final decision, where Magneto takes Senator Kelly. He's trying to kill him, but the Sentinels save him, and then the X-Men had to stop all Sentinels, and Magneto's telling them they're fools. And like I said, that's when you had the iconic scene I talked about earlier with Jubilee and Wolverine talking. But then another part was when Magneto's standing there watching him leave, goes, "Foolish fools, the brave are always the first to die." And then you think they're all somebody's going to die in this, and then Magneto comes to the aid of Professor Xavier and saves him. He said, "Do you think I was going to let you die alone, Xavier?" And then he helps them, and then everything, and then he protects Xavier again when he looks at Master Mold. It's like, "You are the embodiment of all that is evil in the world. You must be destroyed." And you see in his in the aircraft, you see in the Blackbird, you see all the TNT and dynamite and everything ready to blow him up. He's going to crash into him and stuff like that. And then Magneto uses his magnetic abilities to protect him. And then they end up blowing up Master Mold. Or so you think, because he does get to return in a later episode. But at that time, you didn't see Master Mold for a long time till later on. So I thought that was one of my favorite ones, just that iconic memory and the dialogue, and that I thought it was really well done in season one.
yeah. I mean, I just like you. I didn't really find out that Kitty Pryde was the one who went back in time till years after. So the first time I found out about that was when I was getting ready to watch the Days of Future Past movie for the cinema. I wanted to find out more about the story arc from the comics, and
Mm-hmm.
I found out it was Kitty Pryde who went back in time. I thought, okay, that's interesting, but I kind of understood and respect that it made more sense that Wolverine is the one who goes back in time. Bishop in the Kitty Pryde role, it kind of reminded me of Terminator a little bit with him and Cable. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Terminator because I'd already seen a Terminator 2 by that point. So there was definitely some similarities with Terminator, like going back in time, stopping us, protecting someone, stopping the future from being changed. Definitely reminded me of Terminator a lot. And Bishop was a real badass character. I really liked Bishop a lot. He looked like someone who could have been in Metallica. You know, he had like this long black hair with the shaved sides, the earrings, the biker jacket, and the big gun and the motorbike. I thought, yeah, our Bishop was a really good character. He never really gets a lot of love, Bishop. You know, I mean, I know he made one appearance in Days of Future Past movie, but it was just more like a cameo. But he never really got a big part in that movie. He was pretty much killed off within the first, I think, like the last 10, 15 minutes of the movie. I don't know if it was at the start or the end, but might have been at the beginning or the end, somewhere around there. But I just didn't think Bishop really got the proper respect he deserved because he was really cool in the animated series. And having him be the one going back in time was different. It was interesting. And for the most part, it worked very well. I really liked him a lot. I thought he was a really good character, and he's definitely up there with Cyclops and the others. He was really good. Now, as we head towards slowly wrapping this up, how did you feel about the show ending the way they did it? What was your thoughts on the way they ended it? Because it ended at season 5 after what 10 episodes, wasn't it?
It was 10 episodes. Yeah, okay, here's the story, folks, that we learned later on. They talk about it. Season 4 was supposed to be the ending of the show. What I've been I talked about this earlier briefly, but it was supposed to be a 21 episode season, and it was supposed to conclude with the 4-part series Beyond Good and Evil. And like I said, that's another story arc. Just 4 parts, definitely interesting. Apocalypse is trying to steal his cable's device, travel back through time. He travels to the middle of everything where everything is controlled by time. Bishop gets stuck in there, and this road's like the yellow brick road in the it's kind of the best way to describe it. The yellow brick road from Wizard of Oz. The best way to describe how these paths look is all like golden roads, each one different timeline. And Apocalypse is trying to take all the psychic. He is when you get introductions to like Psylocke and everybody, and all the psychics he's trying to take, so he could use all the psychics to destroy all the timelines. So I thought it was a very well done story. But the way it ended on episode 21, season 4 was like, okay, I could see that being in the series, but they brought it back for another season. Okay, that's fine. They brought it back for another season, and a lot of these episodes didn't hold up very well. The animation was different. Like I said, definitely would recommend, like I said, Wolverine, Captain America. That was episode 7. And something that was interesting is the second to last episode was the origin of Mr. Sinister. And I thought that was really well done. It
I
tells
forgot
the
about
origin story. But the last episode was called Graduation Day,
that.
and Xavier's attacked, and he's slowly dying, and Magneto's the one has to get him a message to Alondra by using his magnetic ability, but all the other mutants don't want Magneto to go to war and fight the humans, stuff like that. Magneto uses his magnetic ability to get a message to Alondra. Xavier dies, and Alondra comes and saves him, but then she has to go with her, and that's where it all ends with all the X-Men, Magneto standing watching on. I thought the ending was interesting. Now, when I was a kid, when I found out that they were, because in '97 I was 15, and I was still watching this growing because I was one of those shows I watched, that and Spider-Man animated series. And watching this, I was like, wow, that's how they're really going to end it. And that's how they really ended it. And now we know X-Men '97 is coming soon, and it's supposed to pick up right where this left off. So if this is picking up right where this left off, we've done our theory videos on this before. Me and you both have talked about this in long
Yes.
form, and I just think it's going to be interesting to see where they pick up. I think if they go back to the same animation they had the first 4 seasons, and I think they'll be in really good shape, because if they do the animation they did in this last season, they had, because you could tell the contrast, and they just, you could tell they weren't planning them. You could definitely tell they weren't planning to make a season 5 until they got renewed.
Yeah.
They thought season 4 was it. You could definitely tell because the animation was completely different. It it was just a cluster this season. This season 5, it had its good moments, good introduction to certain characters, but it was like some of the stuff is just like, okay, we didn't need any of this. I will say on this though too, the worst episodes that I did not like, the only episodes I never really liked, is anything to do with the Mojo Vision stuff. The Mojo Vision stuff aggravated as crap. It sucked. I did not like them.
Oh
I
yeah.
like Long Shot. Now don't take it wrong. I like Long Shot, but I did not like the villain, the Mojo Vision. I did not like him.
Season 5, animation wise, when you look at the first 4 seasons, the animation in season 1 to 4 looks so smooth and very slick and polished and very well done. As you say, they still hold up very well to this day. But when you look at season 5, the animation just looked very off. I think this must have been around the time. I don't know exactly when, because I know Spider-Man was still going on at the
Yeah.
time. And I know, I think Spider-Man was getting ready to end. I think season 5 was coming up ready to end. And I know straight after that they went into Spider-Man Unlimited, and the animation in Spider-Man Unlimited looked really off. That's what it reminded me of in
Yeah.
X-Men of Spider-Man Unlimited. It just looked very weird. It didn't look finished. It, like you said, you could clearly tell that this was not meant to happen. We were not meant to get a season 5. And I don't know if they was it this I don't know if it was the same designers and animators, because I got the sense watching season 5 when I rewatched the whole series about 3 years ago. I got the sense with season 5, because it was quite a short season, it was about 10 episodes. I got the sense that no one was trying. It was just like they were going through the motions, they were just fulfilling a contract. Nobody really cared, and it showed. Whereas when you look at the other 4 seasons, they were epic. You could really sense that these are guys who really care about the fans and the source material. But here it's just like, how much have we got in the budget? Oh, not much. How many we scheduled? 10. All right, let's just put something together and get it out there because we're done basically. And the idea of Xavier dying, that should have been a story arc itself for season 5. It's okay. This is the final season. Xavier dying. So have Xavier have what happens to him at the beginning of season 5, and then just play that out for all 10 episodes. And all throughout the 10 episodes, you could have had each X-Men member talking about their story about how they first met Charles Xavier, all the while that Charles is dying. And Magneto tells his story, Cyclops tells his story. Every episode is an X-Men member telling their story, and then the final episode is essentially what we got. But that was fine. But I think the 9 episodes should have been just everyone telling their story about their memories of Xavier. That should have been a story arc on its own. It just felt all over the place. It just didn't seem like they knew what they wanted to do.
No, and that's the thing is because you can look at the list and it's like you introduce the plastic of technology, organic aliens in the first 2 episodes, and you had Arkham get introduced as wanting to marry Storm. That's a 2-part. Then you had Apocalypse trying to come back. See, and how they ended season 4 was great because he was stuck in the astral plane. So of course they had to have an episode where Apocalypse trying to get back from the astral plane. That
Yeah,
one was pretty. Jubilee's fairy tale, like we didn't really need that. The old
no,
like Captain America episode, I wouldn't take away because I liked it.
that's very good.
That you could have had at the ending where Xavier was like, this when you see Xavier coming to talk to Wolverine or something like that. Like I said, then you had hidden agendas, like I said, about about people trying to contact Xavier about their son's power. Then you had the origin of Mister Sinister. I wouldn't have took away because I thought I would have used it that episode in the earlier episode. You want to tell an origin story of him.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely.
But, I mean, and it's like I said, the show itself had great. We never, like I said, we could be here for 5-6 hours talking about this series because we could talk about Omega Red and all the other characters they introduced. You had so many characters we didn't even talk about, like Omega Med, Alpha Flight was introduced, X Force was introduced. All kinds of different things were introduced in this show. All these random appearances you saw random appearances like of Ghost Rider, War Machine, Deadpool, the Spider-Man hand, which makes me so mad this day that they
Oh,
let
I remember
X-Men
that.
and Spider-Man 2 episodes of the Spider-Man animated series on season 2. Same cast, same characters, same actors doing the voice work. You couldn't have had more of an appearance of Spider-Man, the X-Men, and just a hand,
Yeah,
and that
no,
was
I didn't get that. I never understood that. So the X-Men can appear in Spider-Man, which that was one of the best crossovers of that show. For those of
yes.
you who don't know about that one, check out my review on that in the Neogenic Nightmare review. That was awesome stuff. But Spider-Man couldn't appear in the X-Men. It just never made sense to me. I just thought, how can you have one appear on one show, but you can't have the other one appear on your show? I think because I'm only guessing, but I think the reason why Spider-Man never appeared in the X-Men animated series because I think Spider-Man was just such a big show And I don't think the idea of Spider-Man as a side character in a guest role, I just think they felt he was just too big for that. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know.
I
I'm just saying.
think they might have been worried about the animation looking a lot different. Like I said, they could, and they could have done it in season 5 where the animation they just didn't really care anymore. It seemed like they could have done it then, just because the animation will look similar to what the Spider-Man and because that's what it kind of reminded me of. Season 5 kind of reminded me of how the Spider-Man animation was to some degree, and I think that's when they could have used Spider-Man in that if they really wanted to, but they just never did. You get to see a hand in an episode. You get to see a hand. That's all you saw. And it's like, well, we know that's Spider Man. Like, and they talked about this in interviews years later. A lot of people like, we didn't have permission to use these characters. We just did it and just label them as something. Like the Hulk appeared in the Juggernaut episode I was talking about earlier. The Hulk appeared in the War Room. So you saw references of different Marvel characters all through. And I think, like I said, to me, the show was it dealt with racism. The show dealt with so much different things, death and everything. It was interesting for its time what it dealt with for an animated show. And I think Morph's story arc was very interesting. How he died, came back, he found his way. When he found his way, that's when you see Master Mold come back, and he has to deal with his past of fighting the Sentinels and stuff like that. I thought that was really well done with Morph. Um, the episode with Nightcrawler and in the monastery, and he has the ex Wolverine and Rogue and stuff are stopping the monastery from being burned down, and Wolverine finds his faith and religion. So yeah, that was a really good episode too. I mean, the show itself is one of its kind where it dealt with racism, it dealt with everything going on in the world at that time, and I think this is why this show gets such high praise for what it did, what it accomplished in its run. And I don't think you're ever going to get another animated series that tops the X Men. I mean, Spider Man animated series had its own thing. It's right up there, but I think X Men to me will always be the number one animated series for Marvel. Not saying DC, because I think Batman animated series has its own place in history, but that's also a DC property. As for Marvel properties, I think X Men is on the top one. Will always be because, like I said, I told you earlier before we recorded, it held the record for the most episodes in animated series till 2015 when the Ultimate Spider-Man came and broke that record. So you're talking about that record stood for 13 years before, or no, for longer than that, for 23 years before they broke that record.
For me, before we wrap this up, I would put X-Men the animated series as a real game changer for the 1990s, and it was for the longest time up until the Justice League came out in 2001. I would say was the first superhero show. Yeah, I would say it was a game changer, first superhero team of the 1990s for animation, and as you say, it holds the record for the most episodes. And it was very good. It was a very enjoyable show, very different. It wasn't just about good versus evil. It was more about dealing with emotions, like I said, racism, politics, the future. And always ask that important question: can mutants and humans coexist in the same place? I thought that was a very powerful question, and that always got addressed throughout the show. And I really enjoyed that a lot. And it didn't just deal with, like I said, good versus evil. It dealt with emotions. Like friends turning on friends, friends dying or friends disappearing. Things like that. It was a very, very good show. And for me, I will put that in my Mount Rushmore of the 1990s cartoons: Batman, Spider-Man, and the X-Men. And I'll put Power Rangers as well. I know Power Rangers is more of a live action thing, but in terms of like the top shows of the 1990s, that's my Mount Rushmore. And if I had to squeeze one more in, if we're allowed number 5, I'd put Transformers, the G1 series, in there as well. But yeah, X-Men, definitely an important show. And I would say that, the animated shows that came after, as good as they were, I don't think they was able to capture the magic of the 1990s cartoon. I don't think they were as good.
I think they were good. I just don't think they were ever at that level that this one was. That where you had all this stuff that was going on, and it's just one of those things. Like I don't feel like it was ever at that true level of what the X Men, the first one, brought, and that's what I'm saying with X Men '97. The X Men '97 show, when it comes out, has such high expectations.
It
Like
does.
it has such high expectations because everybody remembers the '92 series as being one of the best X-Men animated series of all time. The funny thing is, the Japanese version of the intro was a lot better, and you can find it on YouTube. You ever watch the Japanese intro version of the X-Men animated series? Was a lot different. The animation for that, just the intro, the animation was good, was still the same as the US, but the intro, the animation was completely different, and it was a lot better, I thought, than the one we got. I thought the animation was. The
The
music not, but the animation was incredible. And
the anime version of X-Men, the one you're talking about, I mean, that didn't last long. I think I've got it on DVD. That lasted about 10 episodes, but each episode was quite long. They were like an hour plus long, like a mini movie. It was a very good show, very underrated. I'm not sure a lot of people know about that show, but yeah, that was very good as well. But the shows that came after, like X-Men Evolution and Wolverine and the X-Men, great X-Men shows in their own right, but for me personally, I don't think they was able to quite capture the magic of the 1990s animated series, because the 1990s cartoon not only lasted a very long time, but it made a huge impact, and it was the first one of its kind. And by the time those other shows came out in the 2000s, everything had already been done. Everything had been done, and the voice acting, it was okay. I felt they were just trying to copy the original. I don't think the voice acting was quite on the same level as the original, but they're still good shows to watch. They were good shows to watch, but not as good as the original. Not even close. That's just what I thought. But yeah, X-Men animated series, one of the most important superhero shows of all time. Loved it and still love it to this day. And as you say, X-Men '97 has very huge expectations to live up to, and all we can hope is it delivers. So fingers crossed. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's coming out in January 2024. I think
yeah,
that's when it's coming out. That's when it's coming out, and I've seen some of the sketches for the show. It looks near enough the same as the original, but they might change it around slightly to bring it more up to date. But for the most part, it looks near enough the same. So we shall see, really. But I'm really looking forward to it, and let's just hope it's good. So that's going to be it from us. We are going to wrap this up now. What was your thoughts and opinions on the X-Men '90s cartoon? Did you enjoy it? How did you first find out about it? What was your favorite story arcs? Do you agree with me in Holiday's opinions? Do you think this is one of the greatest superhero shows of all time? Or do you have a different opinion on it? And who's your favorite characters from the show? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below. Holiday, this was an absolute pleasure going down memory lane, talking about this incredible cartoon, and bring on X-Men '97. And great having you again.
I appreciate being back on again.
So take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.